Alrighty, folks. So, um, I saw an article today from Car and Driver entitled "The Daytona 500 Sucked, and NASCAR is going to keep sucking too," by John Perley Huffman, who writes for Car and Driver. Now, I haven't read Car and Driver for a long time, and I am not familiar with any of John Perley Huffman's work. But what bothered me about this article wasn't just the overt negativity and the bashing of the headline caught me, and obviously it's a clickbait headline that's meant to get clicks and stuff like that. And I'm probably going to put a clickbait headline on this video just because it's how the internet's done. So I'm going to put some kind of clickbaity headline on this thing to get people to click because I want people to listen to it. I hope that I articulate my points better and use information in a more accurate and correct way to support my opinions than this piece by a guy who is apparently a professional writer and should know better, because it's not so much his opinion. If you didn't like the race, I don't care, man. And I'm not necessarily super happy with the direction that NASCAR's gone. You guys have heard me about that and stuff like that. But if you're gonna make points and have opinions, at least get your facts right and have honest justifications for the claims that you're making. And that's my biggest problem with this piece of writing. He starts out talking about how the Super Bowl was awful, and it's like, first off, the Super Bowl was low scoring. It wasn't awful. In my opinion, I thought it was a very well played defensive game. Intense, close the entire time. So it's interesting to me that this guy on the one, and we're going to get into it later, that this guy in the one sense is saying, all about traditional NASCAR and the way that it was. But when he is watching Super Bowl, it has to have 50 points scored by either team to be sensational. It can't be, traditional grind out inches and yards battle between two titans, which it was. You had the two best teams in football doing a battle in the trenches, kind of like it used to be. So there's very little consistency in what he's doing, and which I think may be the thing. I think that I don't know what happened. I don't know what it is, but it's like this is a very lazy piece of writing, in my opinion, because it's kind of all over the place and makes absolutely no sense. But he goes on. NCAA football championship game was a snooze. Super Bowl was awful. NBA season all about tanking teams and obscure trade intrigue, which I guess. I mean, I don't really watch the NBA, but I'm sure that once the playoffs start, then it's going to be about the playoffs. Right now, if the playoffs are relatively solidified and it's pretty clear who's going to be in and who's going to be out, then of course the main storyline at the end of the season is going to be who's tanking to try to get more ping pong balls for the lottery, because that's how they award the top picks in their draft. Yeah, there are consequences for how you construct the rules under which you play by, and teams are going to do their best to gain the most advantage based on the rules that you set for them. So as a sports organizing body, it's your job to create rules that encourage and incentivize teams to play their hardest to win and create good, entertaining competition, because that's what's entertaining for fans. Sports are entertainment, and if you provide good entertainment, then people will watch your sport. You'll be able to attract more eyeballs, and that generates ad revenue. That's how this whole game, the game in the larger sense, works. So then he moves on. Then along comes the Daytona 500 win. If anything, it was even worse. In fact, it was the worst 500 ever run at any track in the state of Florida. Are there other 500-mile races that happen in the state of Florida? I'm not aware of one, but I don't know. But even then, it wasn't even the worst Daytona 500. The worst Daytona 500 was the one that was run in, I think it was 2008 or 2010 with the nonsense tandem drafting. That was far and away the worst. That was a circus because you didn't have any, drivers weren't able to make moves on your own. You had to be locked up in tandem with someone else who was sacrificing their race for your race if they happened to, or you had to work in teams, and the drivers, and it put drivers in a box where it was guaranteed that a lot of them were going to crash out, and you had a ton of wrecks. It was just overall, the thing was just a circus. I remember like having friends and family over to watch that one and trying to explain to them what was going on, and to someone who wasn't a racing fan, trying to explain why the cars had to lock up in tandem to draft, and why they kept wrecking, and why it looked like no one had a clue what they were doing. Yeah, that was clearly the worst Daytona 500 that I've ever seen. Again, that's my opinion. You're free to disagree. If you do, comments below. I know that a lot of people really liked that one. I didn't. That was terrible. That was just a bad rules package, and we'll get into some. I'm gonna circle back around to that example to articulate some of my other points later. He continues. The reason the race is so lousy is the same reason other sports have grown so crappy. There's an ongoing war against excellence. Here we go again with this nonsense crybaby victimhood. I'm sorry, I did crybaby victim. Oh, there's a war against that. No, there isn't. There is no war against excellence. That is not a thing. It just isn't. And so I'm gonna get into what's going on and where he gets some things wrong, but like that right there immediately turned me off, because it gets into this whole nonsense. Okay, look, the way that often gets used is where rich people who have acquired millions and billions of dollars, and they're like, and they own yachts and houses and all this stuff, and when the rest of us point out like, hey, that's cool you bought all that stuff for yourself, but what about the rest of us? And they're like, why are you attacking me for my excellence? Like, 'cause you didn't do all that on your own. Anyway, that phrase right there always sets me off, and I'm sure I'm going to get plenty of hate for that, but I'm sorry. That one triggered me big time. He continues. That NASCAR has lost much of its cultural resonance isn't news. YouTube. You know what? I'm not going to read the whole thing, so I'm just going to skip down. He talks about the death of the newspaper industry and stuff like that. Let's see. And it's not that he gets everything in this wrong. There are some things. NASCAR exists in the context of the American sports and entertainment industry, and it's subject to the commercial and political currents that affect every other sport. And it's killing all of them. NASCAR is just trying quicker than most. There is some truth to that. Look, the bottom line of what I think is actually at the core of a lot of live sports declining in audience, and NASCAR included, that there are a ton of different and varied reasons why that's the case. But I think that the biggest reason that that's the case is the existence and expansion of new media. The reality is that there's just a lot more entertainment media out there than there used to be. You know, back in 1979, which was the story that we're always told as NASCAR fans about the winter that blew through the southeast and the blizzard and everyone was snowed in, and there was one channel and it was CBS and it was showing the NASCAR race and that's the only thing that was on TV. Yeah, it was pretty much. I mean, I'm sure that that there wasn't just CBS. There was NBC and ABC and maybe Fox. I don't know what the channel, but there were like 5 channels on the dial back in 1979, and the only major live event, the only event that was going on that day was the Daytona 500. So people who might have been outside and doing other things, in absence of other things to do, said, "Hey, let's check out this Daytona 500 thing that my friends who are NASCAR fans have been telling me about, and I've seen some stuff. Let's check it out and see what that's all about. Let's try something new," right? So, with, again, like 5 channels on the dial, one of them was showing the Daytona 500 from start to finish for the first time ever. And it turned out to be a great race. You had a great battle between Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough that came down to the finish. They crashed on the last lap. Richard Petty wins. That's a name everyone knows. Big, so that's a big deal. There's a fight. Awesome. Massive, like, hugely good thing for NASCAR in general. Brings a lot of, positive attention, and that's the spark that spurs massive growth for NASCAR over the next 3 decades. Now, however, the shape of the landscape is very different. I've got 200 or 300 channels, probably more than that, on my TV that I never watch. I literally only use my TV to watch NASCAR races, occasionally tune into news where there's a large news event going on, maybe watch C-SPAN sometimes. That's about it. There are like maybe 5 or 6 channels that I will watch, but there are hundreds of channels that clearly exist because there is a critical mass of people that watch the programming on that channel, to the extent that the network, in my case it's Dish Network, that the provider feels like there is value in having that channel as a part of the package that they sell to their subscribers. So there aren't 5 channels, there are like 400 channels. And then on top of that, you've got YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, and so you've got so many different and varied ways so that everyone can, people aren't just tuning in and like, "Oh, I have nothing to do today. I've heard about this thing. Let me tune in and check that out." Sometimes people do that, but there's no mass event of people tuning into one thing hardly ever anymore, because there is enough variety in media available that people can pick exactly the thing that they want to watch at the time they want to watch it. So ratings are down across the board for everything individually because there's more stuff out there, so people are picking and choosing the content that they want to watch. They're not just picking it based on, well, I have free time now, so what's the thing that will entertain me for a little bit right now? It's gotten a lot more specific. So, as a consequence, people who were casual fans of football, but, for example, might be really into rugby or, really into, there's just all kinds of stuff. So, if you're really into Law and Order marathons or History Channel marathons, you can just go binge out on that now in a way that you couldn't before. You can watch all the StarCraft 2 tournaments if that's your thing. You can Rocket League esports. You can, a lot more people are going to live entertainment, things like I do on Twitch, where you can actually interact with the the streamer and feel like you're part of a community as opposed to just passively watching entertainment where you can't participate in it in any way. There's just such a greater variety of things to do that getting the same critical mass of an audience to follow and watch one specific thing is becoming less common. And live sports, NASCAR included, are going to have to figure out a way to exist and thrive and try to figure out a way to make their business model work in this new climate. So he goes on to say, he actually does make some good points. The championships in these leagues are ultimately mid. That's true. It really doesn't matter. So when I live in St. Louis, when the Cardinals win the World Series, there's a big celebration, and everyone around town who's a Cardinals fan is walking tall for a day or two, and that's it. And we don't. It's not like that. We don't get prize money. There's no awesome. Their new businesses don't come flocking into St. Louis with bringing jobs. It's not like the city doesn't win anything tangible other than, hey, our team won that year, and that's cool, and we're happy for that, because when we're not working our jobs and going around the run-of-the-mill, is my dog's back there chewing up the pillow that he sits on. Anyway. Going around and about our run-of-the-mill normal lives, we get it. We watch sports as a distraction from that. So when that distraction goes well when we get the result that we want, we're happy. But he's right. Ultimately, the championship is meaningless. He says only hardcore fans remember who the champion was. 510. Look. I can go back and I can name you every Daytona 500 winner from memory from at least 1983 up to current. I won't bore you with it, but I did it recently and checked the list, and I got them all right. So, I consider myself a hardcore NASCAR fan, and I can probably do that with championships too. So, yes. Only the really hardcore fans are going to have that much intimate knowledge of the history. He says what matters to fans is seeing extraordinary athletes exceed expectations in spectacular ways. An excellence us fans can't achieve. And then he's going to make some points that sort of make sense and some points that don't make sense. For basketball, LeBron James doing a rundown shot block. Yes. That's true, but the only reason again, understand that the only reason why it's exceptional for LeBron James to run down and block a shot is because he's not doing it to some average Joe like me. He's doing it against another competitor of not equivalent skill, but comparable skill. So watching LeBron James be able to accomplish these feats at the top level of the sport is what's so amazing. So it is the competition that makes that achievement excellent, and why it's so cool to watch it. Interesting that there's a war on excellence, and yet he uses a current basketball star as an example of excellence. Weird. It's almost like he forgot what he was talking about. Continuing on, it starts to get weirder, because the next one is a leaping catch by Odell Beckham Jr. Again, modern athlete. I thought there was a war on excellence, and yet you've used two examples of athletes who play today. Today, they're playing not actually today, but currently. That one really isn't about the level of competition. That would be impressive largely without. Now, it's made more impressive because of how far he has to run, how far the quarterback can throw the ball, and the ability level of the coverage that he has to beat. Again, and the other thing is that just watching him go out and make a leaping catch in practice would be a cool thing that we watch on YouTube for 30 seconds and then we move on. It's because it happens in the context of the game where that catch has significance. That's what makes it exciting and compelling and interesting for us to watch as fans. Diego overrolling 300. Secretariat winning by 31 lengths at the Belmont Stakes. The fans watching horse racing are people, not horses. Criminy. I told you it was going to get weird. And then he goes on to with baseball and golf examples. And he says it's not all about packs of competitors jockeying to be nose ahead at the end. Look, again, the reason that those feats that we remember in sport are exceptional, the reason why it was so impressive that Richard Petty won 7 championships, 7 Daytona 500s, and 200 career victories, is because of who he was beating. It's because he was beating in those races the likes of David Pearson and Cale Yarborough and Leroy Yarborough and Bobby Isaac and the Allisons, Donnie and Bobby. If he was just going out to which again, and this is the thing where history isn't always as glamorous. Some of those victories were like 100-lap tracks at 100-lap races at fairground tracks. That's why I actually am really interested in the possibility of Kyle Busch getting 200 career wins in NASCAR touring races, and I might do another video about why I actually think that feat is of a similar level to that one. If you actually go and look at what Kyle Busch is doing now and some of the competition level that Richard Petty was doing back then, NASCAR was going to dirt tracks. They were doing 100-lap races, and you didn't have all of the competitors going there. Now, the competition level was just different, so it was more possible for a really well-funded team that brought exceptional equipment and to the track every single week to go out and just flat out dominate. It was an exceptional team effort, but understand that there's a lot that goes into that. So I in no way am meaning to minimize anything that Richard Petty did, but to understand, like, in a lot of ways, I've always thought that Earnhardt's 7 championships were in a lot of ways more impressive than Petty's. Now, Petty's 200 wins are an amazing feat, and it'll never be touched. And I don't want to get into it, but Earnhardt won his 7 championships in an era where there was much tighter competition, where the competition was closer. Those winning 7 championships in the time that Earnhardt did, and winning 7 championships in the time that Jimmy Johnson did, is a much different achievement than 7 championships in the time or the time period that Richard Petty raced. It just is. What makes these feats impressive is who else you had to beat to accomplish that. So then he goes into 500-mile superspeedway race used to develop along dramatic lines. As engines blew, drivers experienced brain farts, luck played out, the story of the race would develop. Yes, that's true, sort of. But again, what has played out over the course of the years is that the teams racing in NASCAR decided that, hey, we don't want to just go out there, run 20 laps, and have our engine blow so that we can watch Richard Petty go celebrate in victory lane. We want to finish the race too, so we're going to make our engines better. We're going to make our cars better. We're going to take that part that broke and fix it and figure out why it failed so that it doesn't fail again. This has been a natural evolution over the course of 40 or 50 years of the teams getting better at machining and engineering the parts that go into their cars so that they are less prone to failure. If you go back and look at results, you've got less mechanical failures in each decade than the one prior because the teams are getting better at building the equipment. It's only very, very recently that NASCAR has, when I say very recently, I'm talking like, I think it was 2014 when NASCAR first, it was either 2014 or 2015 when NASCAR first introduced the tapered spacer. Before that, they had gotten to the point where they were cranking out 900 horsepower. 900 horsepower out of a small block V8 engine and running a 600-mile race in the case of the Coca-Cola 600 with very, very few failures, very few equipment failures. So it's not like NASCAR has clamped down on horsepower just in the interest of reducing failures. The teams don't want to have their engines failing all the time, so the teams started either building better engines on their own, or what actually has happened more is that in the Ford side, it's Roush Yates engines. In Hendrick, or on Chevrolet, Hendrick supplies a lot of the engines, and Earnhardt supplies most of the engines. And then for Toyota through Joe Gibbs Racing, but those are Toyota. So there are like 3 or 4 suppliers of engines to all the teams. So everyone gets the same equipment, not because NASCAR says they have to have it, which is the point that this guy makes, which shows that he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about and hasn't done a lick of research. He just had his axe to grind about the war on excellence, and he was going to make that his point, and then he was going to make every single thing that he said, whether it was true or not, fit into that point. It's just nonsense. That's not how it worked at all. It was not NASCAR trying to create, NASCAR sacrificing excellence on the altar of parity, as he claims. That's not what happened. What happened was that the teams decided that they didn't want to all just finish last to the Earnhardts and the Pettys, so they decided to buy the same stuff that the top teams were running, and those top teams said, hey, we can make a buck selling our engine to the competition. So, at the end of the day, at least, Rick Hendrick's like, look, I'm running 4 teams here, so all my 4 teams are going to have good equipment, and I still want to go win, but I can run this thing, and make a profit by selling my engines to the other teams. If I can do that, hey, that's win for me. Now I'm playing with house money when I go out there to those races, and those other guys who are buying my engines, they're the ones who are putting all the risk in there. I'm just going to the track, and anything that I win's a bonus because I've already made my money with the sponsorship deals and by selling my engines and equipment and outsourcing that to the other teams. That's what brought a lot of the parity. The other thing that brought parity into NASCAR wasn't an objection to excellence. It was that if you've got 40 teams on track, okay, and let's just split it evenly. Let's say, you're going to I'm going to make it up, but let's say you got 15 teams running Ford, 15 teams running Chevy, and 10 running Toyota. Okay, so at the start of the season, we go through the first 4 races, and every single track we go to, the Chevrolets are half a second a lap quicker than the Fords and the Toyotas. Why are the Ford and the Toyota teams going to keep showing up when they know that they are going to be losing every single race to the Chevrolet teams? Why would anyone play that game? Why would they go in there knowing that their best case scenario, if none of the Chevys crash, or their best case scenario is that 2/3 of the Chevys crash out and they can maybe get a top 10? Yeah, you're going to see a lot of teams showing up 15, 20 weeks into the season in inferior equipment just so that NASCAR can put on a show while Chevy is selling. No. That's why we have parity, is that First off, the Ford fans don't want to show up each week knowing that their teams are going to be competing for top 20s. The Toyota fans don't want to do that. The drivers and the teams aren't going to sit around. Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember this, but those of you who watched back in the 90s when the cars were still more different, every single week you'd have one set of drivers in the garage who were walking 2 feet tall because they had a little bit of an advantage. And you had the other 30 teams in the NASCAR hauler complaining that the Fords had an advantage because they had 20 more horsepower. Or the Chevys had an aerodynamic advantage when they came out with the Monte Carlo in 95 and it had that bulbous, more rounded nose. And then you know what happened? The Fords came out with a Taurus that had a more rounded. The Pontiacs came out with one that was more rounded. Parity wasn't just because NASCAR built it into the rules. Parity naturally happens because one manufacturer or one team tries something new to gain an advantage, to achieve excellence. It works, and then everyone else copies that. So either you have NASCAR defining the rules in a way that will hopefully promote fair competition and good racing, or you have the teams defining the same very narrow way that things are going to work, except that there's no guarantee. It might produce good racing, it might produce absolutely terrible racing, but you're going to get the same restriction because at the end of the day, someone's going to hit on a combination that works really well, and then everyone's going to do that exactly same thing. That's not a war on excellence. That is everyone else trying to achieve excellence, which again, that's what sports is about. NASCAR sacrifice excellence, just nonsense. Every car is the same chassis setup. That's wrong. Same tires, yes, because we went through a tire war in 1994 that put drivers' lives at risk, quite honestly. We saw drivers die because Hoosier was bringing a tire that was faster on the short run, but was much more prone to failure, which in the 90s was a really dangerous thing because drivers didn't have Hans devices, the cars weren't built nearly as safe, and there was no safer barrier. So when they blew a tire at 190 miles per hour and went straight into a wall, they were hitting a concrete wall. So yes, we don't have tire wars. We have the drivers on the same tire because we don't want to see tire companies competing for who can sacrifice driver safety in the name of getting a little bit of extra grip. That's not, I don't know. I don't know about you, John Perley Huffman, but I don't find putting drivers at safety on the line and potentially killing them for entertainment to be something that I want to see. Maybe that's your bag. Maybe that's your game, but that's not what I find entertaining. So I am actually glad that they all have the same tires, because sacrificing safety for speed, which is the equation that you get when you're messing with tire compounds, trying to get more performance out of them, is what you get. I actually think that Goodyear has done a very good job at trying to engineer a tire instead that is good for competition. You want a tire that has decent grip, but not too much. You want some fall off so that if a caution comes out, it's actually a strategy decision as to whether or not teams want to come in and take tires. So you don't want to make a compound that's too hard where teams can run an entire 500-mile race on the same set of tires. They could do that. It just that would remove all pit strategy. So you need some fall off, but ultimately you don't want a tire that's just going to fail. We went through this, I think it was the 2008 Brickyard 400, where they ended up having to throw a caution every 20 laps, because if they didn't, at every 22 laps, for the tires would fail. So that was one race where Goodyear got it wrong. But you would see a lot more races marred by random tire failures if you brought back a tire war, and it's like we've been down this road, we know why it doesn't work. Please stop bringing up nonsense arguments like that. Again, sorry I got triggered, but that that one when it comes to driver safety stuff, that stuff honestly pushes my buttons, and that's really what the tire war, the tire. So same gear ratios. Okay, fine. I like that one. I don't really care. If they open it up, you know what happens when they open it up and you have three different gear ratios to pick? Because I remember when they did that, everyone picked the same gear ratio. So just set one that makes sense for the track, and everyone runs the same gear ratio. And under stressed V8s that won't fail. They're turning 12,000 RP. They're turning what is again as recently as 2013, they were turning 900. They were doing 900 horsepower and turning like 10 or 11,000 RPM at the end of the straightaway. I think they're putting plenty of stress on these motors. What has happened is it wasn't in the interest of parity that NASCAR has removed. As I understand it, what's happening is that the engine manufacturers are coming to NASCAR and saying, look, you guys aren't bringing in the same number of eyeballs and helping me sell as many Fords off the lot as I used to. So it's not worth it to me as Ford Motor Company to invest the amount of money in research and development that it takes to make an engine that can run 900 horsepower at 10,000 RPM and last for 500 or 600 miles. So either you, NASCAR, come up with a way to make these engines a little bit less stressed so that we can actually build an engine for these teams that will last, or we're going to pull out. And that's what's really going on here, is that because of the decreased viewership, because the sport's not attracting enough eyeballs to justify the same amount of money that advertisers were spending on it in the past, NASCAR is having to make some really tough choices on how they can cut cost to keep the manufacturers and the teams coming to the track. That's the bottom line. That's what we're dealing with here. This is not a parity thing. This is a, you know, and honestly, I'm not sure. Look, I'm not in the boardrooms. I'm not sure exactly who all is in there, but I do remember hearing that. I think that it might be the case that insurance for the racetracks, these giant racetracks that are giant pieces of property that cost a ton to build, that where you bring in sometimes 100,000 people in one event, the insurance bill for liability insurance, because all these tracks, they have to operate with insurance. If, you know, God forbid, if something were to happen where a car got up into the stands, it wouldn't be like it was in the 1950s at Le Mans, where, I mean, well, actually, that almost killed racing. Like, straight up, that did kill racing in some countries. There were some countries that after that horrible wreck happened at Le Mans, that they just outlawed racing in some countries for a while. But if that happened at a NASCAR event today, if that wreck in the, I think it was the 2015 Coke Zero 400, the July race at Daytona, where Austin Dillon went at the catch fence, if that car would have gone into the stands and killed 30 or 40 people, that might be the end of NASCAR as we know it. That's why you're seeing these horsepower reductions. I think ultimately part of it's driver safety, but I think that the bigger part of it is, I think that there is something to, they're trying to slow these cars down because NASCAR has tried everything they can do with making the roof flaps bigger, with the side. That's why they're snug down to the ground right now with the side skirts, is because that makes it, when the car gets sideways, there's nowhere going underneath it. So, you know, a lot of the changes that you've seen with NASCAR right now, they're in the interest of safety as much as anything else. So NASCAR needs to be able to demonstrate to the companies that are insuring these tracks for liability insurance that, hey, there's actually a really, really low risk that you're going to have to pay out that liability insurance money to the families of these fans in the event of a catastrophe because we've done everything we can to decrease the likelihood of that catastrophe existing. I know that like that's not the fun part of watching the sport. We don't want to have to think about that, but the reality is that we don't live in a society where stuff is just free, where we get to come up with a cool idea of like, hey, let's go send the cars around the track at 250 miles per hour and watch them, and it's going to be great. Yeah, that's a cool idea, but the reality is that if one of those cars goes in, at 250 miles per hour, gets in a wreck, sends a wheel into the stands, and 10 people die, then you're going to have lawsuits from 10 different families that are going to look at every aspect of your event. And if you are found to be guilty of negligence, if there is something that you could have done that would have made it safer and you didn't, and that would have prevented those deaths from happening, and you didn't do it, you might not be found criminally negligent, but you will be found civilly negligent, and the insurance company is then going to have to pay out a lot of money. So in order to get the insurance company to insure the tracks, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the particulars of a legal expert, but I do understand the general principles on how this stuff works. So that's definitely at play. Um, every driver, every car, every team does not have the same equipment. That's why we saw the big three last year. Everything was about the big three because Kevin Harvick, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., they were better than everyone else. They were achieving excellent performances through the entire season. Everyone was talking about the big three, and the big three made it to the championship race. And then you know what happened? Joey Logano's team rose to the occasion and put on an excellent performance to win the championship, beating the big three. And part of the reason why that was such a remarkable feat was because everyone knew how good the big three teams were. So when Joey Logano and his team put together such an excellent performance at Homestead, those of us who had been paying attention to the entire season understood why that was such a big achievement, because we had seen through the course of the season how good Kevin Harvick's team was, how good Martin Truex Jr.'s team was, and how good Kyle Busch's team was. So we knew the level that Joey Logano's team had to rise to be better than those teams and beat them on a night when every team was going to be doing everything that they possibly could to be as fast as they were, because there was a championship on the line. So where's the war on excellence? It doesn't exist. And also, again, Tuesday, professional sports is about storytelling. Did you not just hear the story that I was able to create just from the details of that season? You had three big teams that seemed unbeatable throughout the season, and all three of those teams made it to the final championship race at Homestead. And what happened? This plucky little team that no one gave a chance to, with a driver from Connecticut, came seemingly out of nowhere, took on the big three giants of the sport. David beat Goliath, and you had the champion coming seemingly out of nowhere to defeat. You've got your storyline right there. All you have to do is sit back and enjoy it, or buy into it, or craft. And you know what? If you don't like it, if you feel like it's contrived, if you feel like it's manufactured drama, that's all fine. You don't have to like it, because we live in an era where there's so much other stuff to watch. So I enjoyed that storyline last year. I thought that Joey Logano was a very deserving champion. I enjoyed watching the story of the 2018 championship season play out. I really did. But I know that a lot of fans don't like the playoffs, don't like having it all come down to one race to decide it all, and that's fine too. I would be fine with it going back the other way, honestly. I've said this before. I like NASCAR a lot more than I like NASCAR playoffs. So I'm pretty much cool with deciding the championship however you guys want to decide it. I'm good with it. I like the playoffs. I liked the chase. I liked the old way of doing it. I'm good. Um, no more mystery motors, Hemis, and single overhead cam engines. Yeah, because the teams that are racing in this now are investing so much money into it that they want an assurance from NASCAR that they're not being put at an unfair advantage by someone bringing something else to the track that they're not allowed to bring. So if Chase Elliott is showing up to the track with a 900 horsepower engine, but Kevin Harvick's team is only showing up with a 750 horsepower engine, yeah, let's do a little mental exercise here. How long do you think that Gene Haas is going to be pouring what probably hundreds of millions of dollars at this point with four teams into that effort? How long is FedEx Express going to continue sponsoring Denny Hamlin if they know that every week he's going into he's going out there with a 150 horsepower disadvantage to Chase Elliott, or a 20 horsepower, 30 horsepower disadvantage? You think that they're gonna keep pouring thousands of dollars to sponsor a car that they know is gonna lose, that they know has no chance of winning? I don't think that that's gonna last for very long. So again, he cherry picks his examples. So he cherry picked the example of the 1976 Daytona 500, where Richard Petty and David Pearson were 2 laps ahead of the field, and then they wrecked at the end, and then you had this drama play out where Pearson fired up his Mercury and got it going across the line before Petty could get his car refired because it stalled out in the grass. It's like, yeah, that was cool. That was kind of like? That was kind of like the Daytona 500 that just happened this year, where the rest of the field had wrecked out and was out of contention, and the race ended up coming down to a handful of drivers: Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, last year's champion, Kyle Busch, the 2015 champion, and Denny Hamlin, a previous Daytona 500 winner. So you got three of the top names in the sport who have survived the gauntlet that the end of the race ended up being, and coming down to an end of the race shootout, 2 laps to decide the winner of the Daytona 500. So you're saying that it was better in 1976 when it was 2 cars versus 2019 when it was 5 or 6 cars that were ahead of the field, where the rest of the field was out of the race, essentially. Whether they're 2 laps down or in the garage, it really doesn't matter. They're out of the race at that point. The battle for the win of the Daytona 500 is down to a handful of drivers. I thought that was what you wanted, and that's exactly what happened this year. But this year you didn't like it, but you loved it in 1976. And you really think that the modern sports fan is going to tune in and watch, let's just say, Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch just run away from the rest of the field and be 2 laps ahead by the end of the race? You think that that's going to sell? I kind of doubt it. Anyway, and then he brings up another example again with 2 laps where, and I forget exactly why, but in 1985 at Talladega, Bill Elliott fell 2 laps down earlier in the race, and under green made up those 2 laps because he had an engine that was better than everyone else's engine, and he could just beat them. And that did. That continued for a little while, where that number 9 car that Bill Elliott was driving, when they came to the tracks like Daytona and Talladega, where you could just hold it wide open, it was all about horsepower, in Michigan and stuff like that too, that car would just flat haul. And then you know what happened? Robert Yates started churning out a ton more horsepower, and Richard Childress started building better speedway engines, and Rick Hendrick started building better speedway engines, and all and there and on top of that as well, there was the crash in 1987 where Bobby Allison blew a tire and flew towards the stands, and thankfully the catch fence did its job and kept that car out of the stands. But NASCAR saw that and decided that 212 miles per hour around a racetrack was just too fast. So they put restrictor plates on the cars at Daytona and Talladega, and we've had restrictor plates on the cars at Daytona and Talladega since then. That was back in 1987. That's not when the decline of NASCAR started. NASCAR continued to rise up until 2005, I think was where it's actually its peak viewership. So 18 years after what, according to the author of this article, would apparently be the death of NASCAR, because no one wants to see parity. God, why would anyone want to watch a bunch of cars in a pack? Really, because the 1993 Daytona 500, the 1997, 2002, 2004, when Dale Earnhardt, yeah, no one liked those Daytona 500s at all. 90, like those are some of the most iconic and historic races that have happened. The 2003 it wasn't the Southern 500. I think it was the Trans-South 400 at Darlington, where Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch were battling side by side, and Ricky Craven won, interestingly enough, by the nose kick out that the Pontiac teams had argued for, because they felt like they were at a disadvantage to the other manufacturers. So they lobbied, and NASCAR gave them a 2-inch nose kick out because they felt that they were at an aerodynamic disadvantage, and NASCAR did something to allow them to compete, and it turned out that it did actually allow the Pontiac teams to compete, because part of the reason why and again, that used to be really common. It used to be really, what would happen was, at the beginning of the season, the manufacturers would submit to NASCAR that template. They would submit, like, here, this is the car we're going to run for this year. And as the season played out, if it turned out that one of those cars had a clear advantage, NASCAR would give a concession to one of the other teams, to the other manufacturers, to try to level the playing field a little bit. And again, it's like we talked about before. The sponsors, those other teams, they're not going to keep investing money in something where they know it's a rigged game, where they know that they stand no chance of winning at all. It happens in most other. The only one where they really don't do that is Formula One. Formula One's a little bit different, but in sports car racing, you'll have balance of power adjustments where they'll add weight to a specific car because manufacturers brought a car that's just flat better than the rest of the competition. So they'll do a balance of power adjustment, things like that. I'm pretty sure that happens. I know that I've seen stuff with that. It's not in all sports car racing, but there is some of that comes into play. But again, it's like either that happens or you do, and there is interest in the mystery of I love Formula One. I like seeing hey, Mercedes has been really dominant for the last few years. Watching that battle of, like, is Ferrari going to figure out something that's going to bring them up? Is Red Bull going to figure out something that's going to bring them up? But once, I mean, like, it is at the same time a little disappointing to watch it and know it's like, yeah, Force India is never going to win a race until something changes. But, like, going into the start of next year that McLaren's not going to compete for a win. Williams is not going to compete for a win. Scuderia Toro Rosso, not going to compete for a win. I'm glad that there are at least 2 to 3 teams rather than just one team going out and dominating every single race, and the only way that they are going to lose the race is if they encounter a random mechanical failure or have an on-track accident on grid or with a lapped car. that that's the only way that they could possibly win a race or lose a race. Like, I am glad that there is at least one other team that makes it interesting to watch, because otherwise it literally is a snooze fest. But apparently, by not just wanting to tune in every week and watch the same thing happen, I'm perpetuating a war on excellence, according to Mr. John Perley Huffman. He thinks that I should just sit back and enjoy the excellence of watching a team that has a distinct and unfair advantage dominate the rest of the competition. The rest of those teams should just keep showing up to lose to the excellence of the anointed one, whoever that may be, every single week. And that's what's going to fix NASCAR, is just allowing one. Again, I just don't understand the thought process or the logic, and the examples that he cites, when looked at closely, actually counter the point that he's trying to make rather than reinforcing it. I'm going to just pull out a couple more examples from recent memory in the area since excellence was abandoned by NASCAR in the favor of parity, apparently, which was in 2000. It was interestingly as a result of restrictor plates, but you had Jeff Burton lead all 300 laps of a 300-lap race in New Hampshire. 2017, you had Martin Truex Jr. lead I think it was the most miles that had ever been led in a NASCAR race, where he nearly led all 600 miles of the Coca-Cola 600. I think it was back at Michigan, maybe 2004. I'm probably going to get that date wrong, when Dale Jarrett was the last one to win a race by more than a lap. Those were exceptional achievements. They were excellence that was achieved in an era where apparently there's a war on excellence, where excellence can't happen. It's just utter and complete nonsense. Look, if you didn't like, and I didn't like, that the Daytona 500 ended up coming down to a last man standing after you had several massive wrecks that wiped out most of the field. I thought that was a shame. I really did. Because it had been a really good race, and we were all pulling for Matt DiBenedetto through that thing. It was really cool watching a true underdog story develop, excuse me, with an underdog team that hadn't done a whole lot, coming out and really showing a lot. We were all pulling for him, and when he got wrecked, man, that was disappointing. And that took out a whole bunch of other cars. And it was a very different race at that point. But you know what? That's happened throughout the years. The big one has been a thing at Daytona and Talladega for as long as I can remember. It's been it's been a part of restrictor plate racing, but it was back in the 1950s where they I think it was in the 50s, where there was a 50 car or 45 cars, and with the biggest wreck in NASCAR history. You can go look it up. There's pretty bad old video of it, but where like just tons of cars pile up. I'm sure that the rest of that race, you know, after that wreck happened, you had like 5 cars that were running around for a lot more laps than you had at the end of this one. So, first off, no, it wasn't the worst Daytona 500 that's ever been. Last year's was actually probably worse because you had the big wrecks happen earlier, so the field got thinned out much earlier in the race than it did this year. Look, at the end of the day, I'm not super thrilled about NASCAR going to lower horsepower engines and higher downforce. I think that I talked about it in my preview video for the Daytona 500. And this video has probably gone on longer than I wanted to. But I'm going to throw it up there anyway, and we'll see. But, you know, I'm not super thrilled about it going down. It does ruin some of the appeal for me, knowing that there's something about the V8 engine. There's just something romantic about that's been associated with NASCAR for a long time. But you know what? Formula One got rid of the V12 engines, and it didn't kill Formula One. IndyCar got rid of the turbo engines, and it didn't kill IndyCar. Now they're going back to them. So, I think that that's a smart move for IndyCar. While NASCAR's going towards lower horsepower stuff, IndyCar's going in the higher horsepower direction, and I think that that's actually a really smart move on their part. We're going to be getting the Gen 7 car in 2021, and we're also going to be seeing NASCAR restructuring the schedule. We're going to see them, apparently from what we've been seeing, there's a lot of stuff that's on the table. We could be seeing more short tracks, which a lot of fans have been calling for. We could see more road courses in there. We could see some different stuff thrown in with Wednesday night races. They've been talking about doing double features where you do a Saturday race and a Sunday race, shortening the schedules on board. I don't know. There are a lot of things that are in play, and the one thing that I'll say is that I've always liked about NASCAR is that NASCAR is not afraid to make changes and try new things in the interest of improving their product. So, yeah, right now, this particular brand of racing, where the cars are coil bound and they're snugged right down to the pavement, and they're having to run, they're running tapered spacers on them, and they're going to try to use that to bunch the field up every week at the mile-and-a-half tracks, is not my particular cup of tea. But at the same time, I do have confidence, based on my history of being a NASCAR fan, that if it really doesn't work, if it really is a terrible product, that NASCAR will change it again, and there's a good chance that it'll go back to being something that we can all like and enjoy. So that's my hope. The thoughts and opinions on this subject are my own. That I did cite specific things, which I believe is I'm allowed to do in fair use commentary, and commenting on this particular article from Car and Driver that I thought was, I disagreed with a lot of it, but more than just disagreeing, I thought that it was poorly justified and poorly supported arguments, and just in general, it was just a piece of bad writing, and I felt like I felt compelled to say something in response to it. I invite those of you who have watched this whole video to respond to this. Please leave comments down below. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you liked this. Let me know if you didn't like it. That's what the like button and the dislike button is for. You use whichever one you want. The likes do help me more. The dislikes, probably not. So, but, it's the internet. So, hit whichever one you want. If you like my channel and you want to hear more stuff, and click subscribe. I stream iRacing on Twitch, twitch.tv/John_A_Theodore. Head over to that channel. You can find the link in the description below. Give me a follow if you want. Come watch me race sometime. We have fun. We chat about this kind of stuff. And, usually all topics are on board. I like to keep it an open discussion. The one thing that I do say is, try to keep it in the bounds of mutual respect. So as long as we can do that, it's good. Thank you, guys. Yeah, let me know what you thought. I'm trying some new things. This is a new thing for me to try, so we'll see how it works out. Thank you very much. Peace out.